5 years had passed since that emotional reconciliation in Bimbo's office. Now 23 years old, she stood on the balcony of her penthouse apartment, looking out over the Lagos skyline as the sun painted the city golden. Student helper services had grown beyond her wildest dreams. What started as a simple delivery service for students now operated in 12 African countries, employed over 3,000 people, and had helped launch hundreds of other small businesses through its microfinance program. But success, Bimbo had learned, came with its own challenges. Her phone buzzed with another call from a reporter wanting an interview about her upcoming appearance at the World Economic Forum. At 23, she would be the youngest African entrepreneur ever invited to speak at the prestigious event. Miss Adeyemi? Her assistant, Grace, appeared in the doorway. "Your mother is here to see you." Bimbo smiled. Over the years, she and Teresa had grown close enough that calling her mother felt natural now. Teresa had remarried, a kind man named Pastor Johnson who ran a small church, and had found peace in her new life. "Send her in," Bimbo said, straightening her business suit. Teresa entered. But something was wrong. Her usual cheerful demeanor was replaced by worry, and she clutched a crumpled newspaper in her hands. "Bimbo, we need to talk," Teresa said, her voice tense. "What's wrong? Is Pastor Johnson okay?" "It's not about him. It's about this." Teresa held up the newspaper. The headline made Bimbo's blood run cold. "Student helper heiress built empire on stolen ideas. Former employee exposes the truth." Bimbo sank into her chair, scanning the article quickly. A former employee named David Okoro claimed he had developed the original business model for student helper services while working at another company. He alleged that Bimbo had stolen his ideas, used her sob story to gain sympathy from investors, and built her entire empire on lies. "This is ridiculous," Bimbo said, but her hands were shaking as she read. "David Okoro worked for us for only 3 months, and we fired him for falsifying expense reports. This is clearly revenge." "I believe you," Teresa said firmly. "But the story is spreading. It's already on social media, and some people are starting to believe it." Before Bimbo could respond, Grace burst through the door, her face pale. "Miss Adeyemi, I'm sorry to interrupt, but we have a problem. 3 of our major clients just called to suspend their contracts pending an investigation into these allegations. And..." She hesitated. "And what?" "The Minister of Commerce wants to meet with you tomorrow. There are rumors they might revoke our business license until this is resolved." Bimbo felt the walls closing in around her. Everything she had built, everyone who depended on her company for their livelihood, all of it was being threatened by lies. That evening, Mama Femi came to visit. Now in her 70s but still sharp as ever, she listened to Bimbo's concerns with the same patience she had shown years ago. "Child," she said finally, "do you remember what I told you the first night you stayed with me? You said kindness doesn't cost money. I said something else too. I said every morning you have a choice. Wake up angry at the world, or wake up grateful for a new day. Which one will make you stronger?" Bimbo sighed. "I know you're right, but this is different. People are trying to destroy everything I've worked for." "Are they succeeding?" The question caught Bimbo off guard. "What do you mean?" "Look around you. Look at your company, your employees, your foundation. Look at all the children whose lives you've changed, all the young entrepreneurs you've helped. Can lies destroy any of that? They can destroy my reputation. They can ruin my business." Mama Femi smiled. "A reputation built on truth doesn't crumble because of lies. It might bend, but it doesn't break. The question is, what are you going to do about it?" The next morning, instead of going to the defensive meeting with the minister, Bimbo made a different choice. She called a press conference. The room was packed with journalists, many of them looking eager for a dramatic downfall story. Bimbo walked to the podium with confidence, wearing a simple but elegant dress that Teresa had helped her choose. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice clear and strong. I'm here to address the allegations made against me and my company." The room was silent, cameras rolling. "David Okoro claims that I stole the business model for student helper services. I want to show you something." Bimbo had her team project a slide showing her original business plan from the high school competition 7 years earlier, complete with date stamps and judges' signatures. "This is my original business plan, written when I was 16 years old, 3 years before David Okoro ever worked for any company in this industry. These documents have been verified by independent auditors." She clicked to the next slide, showing David's employment record. Mr. Okoro worked for Student Helper Services for exactly 87 days. During that time, he submitted false expense reports totaling 2.3 million naira. When we discovered this fraud, we terminated his employment and reported him to the authorities. These are not the actions of someone who created our business model. The journalists were scribbling notes furiously. "But this press conference isn't really about defending myself against lies," Bimbo continued. "It's about something more important. It's about the pattern of attacks that successful young African entrepreneurs face, especially women." She gestured to another slide showing statistics. In the past 5 years, 67% of Africa's most successful young female entrepreneurs have faced similar false accusations. Stories about stolen ideas, questions about their competence, suggestions that their success must be due to luck, connections, or worse. The room was completely quiet now. "I want to tell you something about success that I learned the hard way. Success doesn't just attract opportunities. It attracts enemies. People who can't build something themselves will try to tear down what others have built." Bimbo's voice grew stronger, more passionate. "But here's what they don't understand. You cannot destroy something built on a solid foundation with whispered lies. You cannot diminish someone's impact by questioning their origins." She clicked to a slide showing photos from her foundation's work. Children in school uniforms, young entrepreneurs receiving small business loans, families who had been lifted out of poverty. Student Helper Services has created 3,000 jobs across Africa. Our foundation has sent 1,200 children to university who couldn't otherwise afford it. We've provided microloans to 800 small businesses, with a 94% success rate. The next slide showed testimonials from employees, clients, and beneficiaries. This is what truth looks like. Not accusations from a disgruntled former employee, but results. Real impact. Real lives changed. Bimbo paused, looking directly into the cameras. To young entrepreneurs watching this, especially young women, they will try to tear you down. They will question your achievements. They will suggest you don't deserve your success. Don't let them. Your success is not an accident, and you don't need to apologize for it. She clicked to the final slide, a photo of herself at 15, standing with her broken suitcase on a Lego street. "This is me 7 years ago, thrown out of my home with nothing but the clothes on my back. Today, I employ 3,000 people and help feed their families. That journey wasn't luck. It was hard work, determination, and the support of people who believed in me when I didn't believe in myself." Bimbo stepped closer to the microphone. "So yes, I am young. Yes, I am a woman. Yes, I started with nothing. And yes, I built all of this myself. If that threatens you, the problem isn't with me. The problem is with you." The room erupted in applause. Several journalists stood up, clapping enthusiastically. During the Q&A session that followed, question after question was supportive. Journalists who had come expecting to see a young woman crumble under pressure instead saw someone who turned an attack into an opportunity to speak truth. The story that ran that evening wasn't about stolen business ideas. It was about a young woman who refused to be intimidated and used the platform to inspire others. But the real surprise came 3 days later. Grace ran into Bimbo's office, practically bouncing with excitement. "Miss Adeyemi, you need to see this." She turned on the television to a news report. The anchor was speaking seriously. In a dramatic turn of events in the Student Helper Services controversy, police have arrested David Okoro on charges of extortion and fraud. According to the investigation, Mr. Okoro was paid 5 million naira by a competitor company to make false allegations against Bimbo Adeyemi. The report continued with details of text messages and bank transfers that proved the entire scandal was orchestrated by a rival company that was losing market share to Student Helper Services. But perhaps more significantly, the anchor continued, Miss Adeyemi's press conference has sparked a movement. The hashtag Young Entrepreneur Strong is trending across Africa, with hundreds of young business owners sharing their own stories of success and the attacks they faced. Bimbo watched in amazement as the television showed clips of young entrepreneurs from Kenya, Ghana, South Africa, and other countries standing up and sharing their stories. The attempted destruction of her reputation had backfired spectacularly, instead creating a platform that inspired and united young African entrepreneurs across the continent. But the biggest validation came a week later, when she received a phone call that would change her life again. Miss Adeyemi? This is Dr. Amina Hassan from the African Development Bank. We've been following your story with great interest, and we have a proposition for you. Dr. Hassan explained that the African Development Bank wanted to launch a new initiative, a $500 million fund specifically designed to support young African entrepreneurs, especially women. They wanted Bimbo to lead it. You've shown exactly the kind of resilience and integrity we need, Dr. Hassan said. Your press conference demonstrated that you understand both the challenges and the potential of young African business leaders. Will you consider it? Bimbo was speechless. Leading a $500 million fund would mean helping thousands of entrepreneurs across the continent. It was an opportunity beyond anything she had ever imagined. But it would also mean stepping back from the day-to-day operations of Student Helper Services, the company she had built from nothing. That evening, she discussed it with Teresa, Mama Femi, and Mr. Smith, who had become like a second father to her over the years. What does your heart tell you? Mama Femi asked. My heart tells me that Student Helper Services was just the beginning, Bimbo said slowly. I built it to prove that I could succeed despite where I came from. But maybe now I need to use that success to help others prove the same thing. And what about the company? Mr. Smith asked. Bimbo smiled. I think it's time to promote Grace to CEO. She's been with me for 4 years, she knows the business inside and out, and she has the same passion for helping others that built this company in the first place. Teresa looked proud but concerned. Are you sure you're ready for something this big? Mama Teresa, Bimbo said, using the affectionate name she had started calling her stepmother. 7 years ago, I wasn't ready to sleep under a bridge either. But sometimes life doesn't wait for you to be ready. Sometimes you just have to trust yourself and jump. 3 months later, Bimbo stood before an audience of 500 young entrepreneurs from 54 African countries at the launch of the African Youth Enterprise Fund. My name is Bimbo Adeyemi, she began, her voice carrying across the packed auditorium in Accra, Ghana. 7 years ago, I was homeless. Today, I have the privilege of announcing $500 million in funding for young African entrepreneurs. The audience erupted in cheers and applause. But this fund isn't just about money. It's about believing in the power of African youth to solve African problems. It's about understanding that our greatest resource isn't oil or gold or diamonds. It's the creativity, determination, and resilience of our young people. She clicked to a slide showing statistics about youth unemployment across Africa. 60% of Africa's population is under 25 years old. That's not a problem. That's an opportunity. Those are 600 million potential entrepreneurs, innovators, and changemakers. The next slide showed success stories from across the continent. We already have young Africans creating solar power solutions in rural villages, developing mobile banking systems that the world has adopted, building educational platforms that are transforming learning. What they need isn't charity, it's investment, mentorship, and opportunity. Bimbo gestured to the audience. Each of you represents thousands of others back home who have ideas, who have passion, but who lack access to capital and networks. This fund is designed to change that. She explained. The program, not just loans, but comprehensive support including mentorship, training, and access to regional and international markets. But I want to tell you something more important than any funding program. Bimbo continued. I want to tell you about the power of refusing to accept limitations. She clicked to that familiar photo of herself at 15 with the broken suitcase. This is where my journey began. Not in a boardroom or a university, but on a street corner with nothing but determination and a refusal to give up. The audience was completely silent, hanging on every word. They will tell you that you're too young, too inexperienced, too ambitious. They will question your ideas, your competence, your right to success. Let them. Because while they're talking, you'll be building. She clicked to a slide showing African tech companies that were now worth billions. Every one of these companies started with a young African who refused to accept that Africa couldn't compete globally. Every one of them faced rejection, skepticism, and obstacles. Every one of them succeeded because they believed in themselves when others didn't. Bimbo's voice grew stronger, more passionate. You are not just the leaders of tomorrow. You are the leaders of today. Africa's future isn't waiting for someone else to build it. It's waiting for you to build it. She clicked to the final slide, African Youth Enterprise Fund. Building Africa's future, one dream at a time. Over the next 5 years, this fund will support 10,000 young entrepreneurs across our continent. But more than that, we're going to change the narrative about African youth from unemployment statistics to success stories. The standing ovation lasted 5 minutes. Over the following months, applications poured in from across Africa. Young people with ideas for everything from agricultural innovations to fintech solutions to renewable energy projects. Bimbo threw herself into the work with the same passion she had brought to student helper services. She traveled to rural villages and urban centers, meeting with applicants, understanding their challenges, and helping to design support systems that would give them the best chance of success. But the most meaningful moment came 6 months after the fund's launch, during a visit to a small town in Uganda. She was meeting with a group of young entrepreneurs who had received funding when a 17-year-old girl named Sarah approached her after the session. Miss Adeyemi, Sarah said shyly, can I tell you something? Of course. My parents died when I was 12. My relatives threw me out because they said I was bad luck. I've been living on my own, trying to finish school while selling vegetables to survive. Bimbo's heart clenched. The story was painfully familiar. When I heard about your fund, I thought it was too good to be true. People like me don't get opportunities like this. But my teacher encouraged me to apply with my idea for a mobile app that helps small farmers get fair prices for their crops. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. Yesterday, I got the letter. I was accepted. $50,000 in funding, plus mentorship and training. Miss Adeyemi, you changed my life. Bimbo hugged the girl, remembering Mama Femi's words from years ago. Sometimes the best way to heal from your pain is to prevent others from experiencing the same pain. Sarah, she said, you changed your own life. You had the idea, you had the courage to apply, you had the determination to keep going despite everything you faced. The funding just gave you a platform. The success will be yours. That evening, Bimbo called Mama Femi from her hotel room in Kampala. How are you feeling about this new chapter? The older woman asked. Like I'm finally doing what I was meant to do, Bimbo replied. Student helper services was about proving I could succeed. This fund is about making sure others don't have to prove as hard as I did. Your father would be proud, Mama Femi said. And so am I. As Bimbo hung up the phone, she looked out at the lights of Kampala and thought about the journey that had brought her here. From a broken suitcase on a Lagos street to leading a $500 million fund that would impact thousands of lives across Africa. But more than the money or the recognition, what filled her with pride was knowing that somewhere tonight, A young person like Sarah was going to sleep with hope instead of despair. Someone who had been told they were worthless was going to wake up tomorrow knowing they had value, potential, and a future. The girl they had thrown away had become the woman who made sure no other child would be thrown away and forgotten. And in a continent where 60% of the population was under 25, that was going to change everything. 2 years into leading the African Youth Enterprise Fund, Bimbo faced her greatest test. Why? 2 years into leading the African Youth Enterprise Fund, Bimbo faced her greatest test yet. She was in her office in Accra, reviewing applications from young entrepreneurs across the continent, when her assistant rushed in with an expression of barely contained panic. "Ma'am, you need to see the news immediately." The television screen showed a breaking news banner. African Development Bank under investigation. Corruption allegations rock youth fund. Bimbo's heart sank as she watched the report. An investigative journalist claimed to have evidence that several officials at the African Development Bank had been embezzling money from various funds, including hers. The report suggested that millions of dollars meant for young entrepreneurs had been diverted to personal accounts. Her phone started ringing immediately. Reporters, board members, government officials, all wanting answers she didn't have. The worst part came that evening when she received a call from Dr. Amina Hassan, who had recruited her to lead the fund. "Bimbo, I'm calling to inform you that pending the investigation, all fund activities are suspended. We can't approve any new applications or disperse any pending funds until this is resolved." Dr. Hassan, surely you don't believe I'm involved in any corruption? Personally? No. But the investigation has to be thorough. I'm sorry, but you'll also need to step aside temporarily while this is sorted out. Bimbo felt like she was reliving the nightmare from 2 years ago, but this time the stakes were higher. It wasn't just her reputation at risk, it was the dreams of thousands of young people across Africa who were counting on the fund. That night, she called an emergency meeting with her closest advisors, Mama Femi, Teresa, and Mr. Smith, who flew in from Lagos. "This feels different from the David Okoro situation," Mr. Smith said grimly. "This is a systematic investigation by international bodies. Even if you're cleared, it could take months." "What about all the young entrepreneurs who are waiting for funding?" Bimbo asked. "Some of them have already left their jobs to focus on their startups based on our approval letters." Teresa, now a seasoned advisor after years of working with disadvantaged children, spoke up. "Maybe this is an opportunity to do something even bigger." "What do you mean?" "You've proven that you can succeed within existing systems. But what if you created your own system?" The idea was audacious. Start an independent fund, outside of traditional banking and development institutions. But it would mean raising hundreds of millions of dollars from private investors, building credibility from scratch, and competing with established institutions. "I'd need investors who believe in the vision more than they fear the risks," Bimbo said thoughtfully. "You'd also need a team of people who are willing to bet their careers on you," Mr. Smith added. Mama Femi, who had been quiet throughout the discussion, finally spoke. "Child, what does your heart tell you?" Bimbo closed her eyes, thinking about Sarah in Uganda, about the hundreds of other young people whose dreams were now on hold because of accusations against people they'd never met. "My heart tells me that we can't let other people's corruption destroy these young people's futures." Over the next 3 months, while the investigation dragged on, Bimbo worked tirelessly to build something unprecedented. The first fully independent, privately funded Pan-African Youth Enterprise Fund. She started by reaching out to successful African entrepreneurs who had built global businesses. People who understood the struggles of building something from nothing and who had the resources to invest in the next generation. The response was overwhelming. Within 6 weeks, she had commitments for over $300 million from African business leaders across the continent and the diaspora. But money was just the beginning. She needed infrastructure, credibility, and most importantly, a way to reach young entrepreneurs who had lost faith in the system. That's when she had an idea that would change everything. Instead of waiting for applications to come to her, she would go to them. a traveling fund that brought resources directly to young people in their own communities. She bought a fleet of buses, each equipped with mobile offices, internet connectivity, and meeting spaces. The Dream Caravan would travel from city to city, village to village, making it as easy as possible for young entrepreneurs to access funding and support. The launch of the Independent African Youth Fund, IAYF, made international headlines, but not all of them were positive. Rogue fund threatens development banking. Red 1 headline. Unauthorized enterprise fund raises regulatory concerns. Read another. Established institutions saw Bimbo's independent fund as a threat to their authority and relevance. Several government officials questioned whether such a fund should be allowed to operate without oversight from traditional banking authorities. But young entrepreneurs across Africa saw it differently. They saw someone who refused to let bureaucracy and corruption delay their dreams. The first Dream Caravan launched in Lagos, with Bimbo herself on board. The response was beyond anything she had imagined. In the first city alone, over 500 young people showed up with business ideas. From a 19-year-old who had developed a water purification system using locally sourced materials, to a 24-year-old woman who had created a mobile app connecting rural farmers directly with urban consumers. But it was an encounter in the small town of Ibadan that reminded Bimbo why this work mattered so much. A young man named Taiwo approached the caravan with a proposal for a waste management system that could turn plastic waste into building materials. His presentation was brilliant, his prototypes were functional, and his passion was undeniable. After approving his funding application, Bimbo asked him what had motivated him to start this project. "My younger sister died from diseases caused by poor sanitation in our community," Taiwo said quietly. "I don't want any other family to go through what we went through." As Bimbo watched Taiwo walk away with his funding approval and a detailed mentorship plan, she realized something profound. This wasn't just about business or economics. This was about young people taking control of their community's futures. Over the following months, the Dream Caravan visited 47 cities across 12 African countries. They funded over 800 enterprises, from tech startups in Nairobi to agricultural innovations in rural Ghana to renewable energy projects in Morocco. But more than the funding, they were changing the narrative about African youth. Instead of seeing young people as a burden on society struggling with unemployment, communities began to see them as solution providers and innovators. The success of the IAYF also vindicated Bimbo's decision to go independent. While the African Development Bank's investigation dragged on for 8 months, her fund had already changed thousands of lives. When the investigation finally concluded, clearing the bank but revealing systemic inefficiencies that had delayed many legitimate projects, several donors approached Bimbo about expanding the independent model to other continents. "What you've built here could work in Latin America, Southeast Asia, anywhere where young entrepreneurs face systemic barriers," said Maria Santos, a Brazilian investor who had followed Bimbo's work closely. The idea was tempting, but Bimbo knew she wasn't ready to think globally yet. Africa alone had 54 countries and over 600 million young people. There was still so much work to be done. However, she did accept an invitation that would elevate her platform in an unexpected way. The United Nations asked her to address the General Assembly about youth entrepreneurship and economic development. At 25, she would be one of the youngest people ever to speak before the full assembly. The speech she gave became known as the Dream Declaration. "Honorable delegates," she began, standing at the same podium where world leaders had debated the future of humanity, "I come before you today not as the head of a fund or the CEO of a company, but as someone who understands what it means to be written off, thrown away, and counted out." The massive hall was completely silent. 2.5 billion people on this planet are under the age of 25. That's not a statistic. That's an opportunity. These are not just the leaders of tomorrow. They are the problem solvers of today. She clicked to a slide showing young entrepreneurs from different continents. In Ghana, a 22-year-old has created a system that provides internet access to rural schools using solar power and recycled electronics. In Brazil, A 19-year-old has developed a water purification system that serves 50,000 people in favelas. In Bangladesh, a 24-year-old woman has built a platform that gives microloans to women who were previously excluded from formal banking. The next slide showed unemployment statistics. Yet we continue to talk about youth unemployment as if young people are waiting for jobs to be created for them. What if instead, we empowered them to create jobs for others? Bimbo's voice grew stronger, more passionate. The traditional model says, get an education, find a job, work for 40 years, retire. But what if the new model is, identify a problem, develop a solution, build a business, create employment for others? She clicked to a slide showing the impact statistics from her fund. 800 businesses funded, 12,000 jobs created, 2.3 million people directly benefited. In 18 months, with $300 million, we've created more sustainable jobs and direct impact than some billion-dollar aid programs achieve in decades. Why? Because we invested in solutions, not just problems. The delegation was completely engaged now. She could see delegates taking notes, phones being lifted to capture her words. I challenge every nation represented here today. What if you took just 1% of your aid budget and instead of giving it to established institutions, you gave it directly to young entrepreneurs in your communities? What if you stopped seeing young people as beneficiaries and started seeing them as partners? She clicked to her final slide, a photo of herself at 15 with a broken suitcase, next to a photo of the dream caravan surrounded by young entrepreneurs. This is the power of believing in potential instead of accepting limitations. This girl with nothing became a woman who has helped create something. But more importantly, she learned that true success isn't about what you achieve, it's about what you enable others to achieve. The standing ovation lasted 7 minutes, the longest for any address to the General Assembly that year. But the real impact came afterward. Within 6 months of her UN speech, 23 countries had created versions of the Dream Caravan model. Young entrepreneur support programs were launched on every continent. The European Union created a €2 billion fund specifically for young entrepreneurs. The Association of Southeast Asian Nations launched a similar program. Even the World Bank restructured several of its youth programs based on the IAYF model. However, with global recognition came global pressure. Bimbo found herself constantly traveling, speaking at conferences, meeting with world leaders, and managing an organization that now operated across multiple continents. The work was fulfilling but exhausting. She was helping more people than ever, but she was also losing touch with the grassroots connections that had always grounded her. That realization came during a particularly difficult week when 3 major crises hit simultaneously. A political uprising in one country threatened several IAYF projects. An economic downturn in another region required emergency support for struggling entrepreneurs, and a competitor organization launched a public attack on her methods. Sitting in her hotel room in New York after back-to-back meetings with UN officials, World Bank representatives, and potential investors, Bimbo felt overwhelmed for the first time in years. She called Mama Femi, who was now 78 but still sharp as ever. "Child, you sound tired." "I am tired. I'm helping more people than ever, but I feel like I'm losing myself in the process. Tell me, when was the last time you sat down with a young entrepreneur and just listened to their story?" Bimbo thought about it. Months had passed since she'd had a one-on-one conversation with someone seeking funding. Everything was now handled through regional managers, application committees, and structured processes. "I can't remember," she admitted. "Then you know what you need to do." The next week, instead of attending a high-profile conference in London, Bimbo flew to a small town in Kenya where one of the dream caravans was operating. She spent 3 days sitting in the mobile office, reviewing applications personally and talking directly with young entrepreneurs. No cameras, no press. Just the kind of personal connections that had inspired her to start this work. One conversation particularly stood out. A 20-year-old woman named Amara had developed a system for preserving food without refrigeration, critical for rural communities without reliable electricity. But she'd been turned down by 3 different institutions because her business model didn't fit traditional templates. They keep telling me I need to think bigger, scale faster, target urban markets, Amara told Bimbo. But my community needs this solution now. Why do I have to change my vision to fit their funding criteria? The question hit Bimbo hard. In her effort to build a global movement, had she lost sight of the local needs that were supposed to be at the heart of this work? Amara, she said, what if I told you that your vision is exactly the right size, and any funder who doesn't see that is looking at the wrong metrics? Within a week, Amara had full funding for her project, exactly as she had envisioned it. 6 months later, her food preservation system was being used in 30 rural communities across Kenya, preventing food waste and improving nutrition for thousands of families. That encounter led Bimbo to make a decision that surprised many of her advisors and board members. She announced that she would step back from the international expansion of IAYF and return to focusing on Africa, but with a renewed emphasis on community-based solutions rather than scalable models. We've proven that young entrepreneurs can create massive impact, she said at a board meeting. Now I want to prove that massive impact doesn't always mean massive scale. Sometimes the most important changes happen one community at a time. The decision wasn't popular with everyone. Several major investors worried about limiting growth potential. Some board members questioned whether she was thinking too small. But Bimbo had learned something crucial during her years of success and setbacks. Staying true to your core mission is more important than meeting other people's expectations of what success should look like. Over the next year, she restructured IAYF to focus on what she called impact depth rather than impact scale. Instead of funding thousands of entrepreneurs across multiple continents, they would fund fewer entrepreneurs but provide much more comprehensive support. Each funded entrepreneur would receive not just money, but a full support team including technical mentors, business advisors, and community liaisons. The goal was to ensure that every single project succeeded, rather than funding many projects and accepting that some would fail. The results were remarkable. Their success rate jumped from 67% to 94%. More importantly, the successful projects were creating deeper, more sustainable change in their communities. But the most significant change in Bimbo's life came from an unexpected source. During one of her community visits in Ghana, she met Dr. Kwame Asante, a 28-year-old physician who had developed a mobile health clinic system for rural areas. His project was impressive, but what caught Bimbo's attention was his approach to community engagement. Most people see rural communities as backwards or resistant to change, Kwame told her during their first meeting. But I see them as having wisdom that urban people have forgotten. My mobile clinics work because they incorporate traditional healing practices alongside modern medicine. Over the following months, as Bimbo mentored Kwame's project, they developed a deep friendship based on shared values and mutual respect. Both had experienced rejection and had turned it into motivation to help others. Their friendship gradually deepened into something more. I never thought I'd find someone who understood this life, Bimbo confided to Mama Femi during one of their regular phone calls. What life? This life of constant travel, of being responsible for other people's dreams, of having your personal happiness always comes second to the mission. And he understands that? He lives it too. His mobile clinics save lives, but it means he's constantly moving, constantly on call. We both chose paths that make personal relationships complicated. Mama Femi was quiet for a moment. Child, you've spent so many years taking care of others. Maybe it's time to let someone take care of you too. Bimbo and Kwame's relationship developed slowly, built on mutual understanding and shared purpose rather than dramatic romance. They supported each other's work, traveled together when possible, and found ways to combine their missions when their paths crossed. The relationship became public when they appeared together at a health and entrepreneurship summit in South Africa. The media was fascinated by the story of 2 young African leaders who had found love while changing the world. But more than the romance, what made their partnership powerful was how they amplified each other's impact. Kwame's mobile health clinics began incorporating entrepreneurship training, helping people start health-related businesses in their communities. Bimbo's fund began prioritizing health and wellness projects, recognizing that entrepreneurship alone wasn't enough if people weren't healthy enough to pursue opportunities. On Bimbo's 27th birthday, Kwame surprised her with a proposal that was perfectly suited to who they were. Instead of a private moment, he proposed during a community celebration at one of his mobile health clinics in rural Nigeria. Surrounded by children, elders, and community leaders who had benefited from both their work, he asked her to be his partner in life as well as mission. "Bimbo Adeyemi," he said, kneeling in the red dust with a simple but elegant ring. "You've shown me that love isn't just about two people finding each other. It's about two people choosing to build something bigger together. Will you marry me?" The community erupted in celebration before Bimbo could even answer. Children danced, elders blessed them, and women began singing traditional wedding songs. "Yes," she said, laughing through tears. "But only if you promise that our love will always make us better servants to our communities, not worse ones." "That's the only kind of love worth having," he replied. Their wedding, held 6 months later, was a celebration of community rather than celebrity. Instead of a luxury venue, they chose to have the ceremony at Mama Femi's house in Lagos, the same small yellow house where Bimbo had learned what family really meant. The guest list included successful business leaders and government ministers, but it also included every child from Bimbo's foundation who could attend, former employees, community leaders from Kwame's health programs, and the entrepreneurs whose lives they had changed. Teresa, now in her 50s and radiant with the peace she had found, walked Bimbo down the aisle. "Your father would be so proud," she whispered as they approached Kwame, who was waiting under a simple arch decorated with flowers from Mama Femi's garden. The ceremony was conducted in 3 languages: English, Yoruba, and Twi, reflecting the diversity of the communities they served. But the most powerful moment came when Mama Femi, despite her age, insisted on giving a blessing. "These 2 young people," she said, her voice carrying across the packed yard, "have learned something that many people never understand. They have learned that you cannot build a lasting love without building lasting value for others. They have learned that happiness shared with community is the only happiness that endures." She looked directly at Bimbo and Kwame. "Your love will face many tests. There will be times when the work demands more than you want to give. There will be times when other people's problems feel heavier than your own happiness. But remember this: the love that grows in service to others is the strongest love of all." As Bimbo and Kwame exchanged vows they had written together, promising to support each other's missions as well as their marriage, the little girl who had once stood on a Lagos street with a broken suitcase could never have imagined this moment. But perhaps that was the greatest lesson of her journey. The future is rarely limited by what we can imagine. It's only limited by what we're willing to work for. After the wedding, Bimbo and Kwame established a joint foundation that combined healthcare and entrepreneurship, proving that systemic change required integrated solutions rather than isolated programs. Their model was revolutionary. Instead of treating health problems after they occurred, they helped communities build economic capacity to prevent health problems in the first place. Instead of giving temporary aid, they provided permanent tools for self-sufficiency. Within 2 years, their integrated approach had been adopted by development organizations on 3 continents. They had proven that love, both personal and communal, wasn't a distraction from changing the world. It was the fuel that made changing the world sustainable. But as Bimbo stood on the balcony of their home in Accra, now 28 years old and more fulfilled than she had ever imagined possible, she knew that this was still not the end of her story. There were still millions of young people across Africa and beyond who needed someone to believe in their potential. There were still communities that needed integrated solutions to complex problems. There were still systems that needed to be changed and narratives that needed to be rewritten. The girl they had thrown away had become a woman who made sure no one else would be thrown away and forgotten. And in a world where so many people felt disposable, that was the most important work of all.